Hello, how are you today, sir?
Good, feeling good. Less jet lag than there was the last few days, so hopefully slightly more articulate, but maybe not. Can't promise anything.
Well, I gotta start. This film is so tremendous. It's magical in such a dark way. It is so moody and intelligent and thoughtful and deep. Where did all of this come from? What was the origin of the story for you?
um, well, I was writing stories at the time that I thought were achievable or that I would possibly be able to make. It was the sixth feature script I wrote, and I'd written like 20 or probably 30 short films by that point. So I just decided to do something where I wasn't thinking about what's achievable, to just dream away without limits or borders. And also specifically to try and do something from genre context, but really treat it the way I do any other story. Well, I'm usually thinking about people's feelings and characters' feelings, not so much the things that happen to them, but how they feel, and how to keep connected with them. And try to kind of capture the stream of feelings and stream of consciousness that they have. And in terms of horror, I was always going to write from a witch's perspective, because I feel like because I wanted to do something set in the 19th century in this particular part of the world. And I feel like if I did live there, I would definitely be accused of witchcraft, even in real life, not necessarily in a movie. So there's always going to be a witch's perspective. And then in researching historical stuff, the thing that piqued my interest that I was aware of but didn't kind of concentrate on was, we all know that women were traditionally, if they were accused of witchcraft, they were often accused of taking the shape of another human being or another or an animal. And yeah, I thought, if you can do that, like if you're living outside of being human and outside of even time, because you're living multiple lives, like what an incredible way to look at being alive and being human and time itself. So, and living. And then, yeah, that's kind of the story that came out.
And in terms of the fact that it's obviously so tied to your home, how did you see that connection as you're telling the story? Were there elements that stood out that you worked to include, or did it just come naturally, or how did it work into the project?
I did a lot of research on what life was like in that moment in this specific area of Macedonia. Partly it's just I do have a grandparent that comes from the specific area. The rest of the grandparents are just from around that section. But there was a specific area where, it was the last part of, the Balkans that probably even saw a wheel as a tractor. And I wanted to see the most recent time and place where this way of life that shaped the world for thousands of years was still what was shaping life, And then and then when in researching it, just trying to connect to growing up, my grandparents were still they lived with us in the city, but they would go back on weekends to their crumbling home houses that were just falling apart. It was not safe to walk into them, but we still did. And then farms, for lack of a better term, the land they had and how they would work it. And at the time, I remember when I was little, my granddad and my dad trying to teach me, or literally making me do things hoeing and digging and all these other, irrigating the ditches and whatever. And I just had no interest whatsoever. I wanted to just read books and gossip with the village women. And I mainly did do that. And I think both of those aspects are reflected in this film. So, yeah, I think in trying to capture this time and place, I was looking for, I didn't want it to be an intellectual, analytical, research-based thing. I wanted it to be something I can connect to, because I felt like I could bring something to the world that still felt kind of real and connected to this other time and place. But I wasn't it wasn't from any kind of patriotism or anything. I'm not actually interested in seeing myself on screen. I'm interested in people like me. I want to know what I would be like if my essence and brain was, put in another human being in this different time and place, how I would cope with that. But yeah, Macedonia was just the easiest stand-in for a whole, continent, humanity, really.
But it is fascinating because we don't see that part of the world on screen, and especially not from this era either. So it brings a whole other layer for people to kind of lean into, I guess.
I think even within that part of the world, like this is not how these stories are depicted. I remember talking, being in Macedonia in a script workshop, and just as soon as it came to my turn to talk about what my story was, as in this one, You Won't Be Alone, and I'm like, it's about a witch, and I could just see everyone's faces around me go, like genre is looked down upon in a way that it isn't in other places. And yeah, so, and also it was so difficult to convince people to the end of the film process, with not outside of the Balkans, but within the Balkans, like good people wanted to help me. That like, this is a story about people and life and feelings, because they're just like, no, yeah, witch claws, I get it. I'm like, no, I know, and all these things are there, but we're still like, there's at least one of the actors, that still doesn't really believe it's about life for humans, and even though she's fucking amazing in the film. But yeah, it comes with its own. I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the world hasn't seen, this kind of part of our, history or life.
Right. Well, I mean, so then speaking on the other side of this, what did the actors bring to the project that I guess you were looking to make sure that they were on top of?
Rawness and fearlessness. I think that's what I was looking for. People who just, when I'm making the movie, I feel like it's the movie that's making itself, and I'm just around. Frankly, like it's not. I can't stand gore. I can't stand violence. So imagine. I feel like, like I was saying, in terms of how the film came together, there was this kind of consciousness I wanted to capture. Like bits of the voiceover came to me, as just a stream of lines, not necessarily connected to each other. And I was like, I want to shape a person around this feeling and these words and this voice. And then what is the story if you put her in this space? And then I need to honor that character's perspective. If she's been isolated from all of humanity in the world, she comes out and everything is just under the surface, another texture. If it's like a flurry of leaves or a bunch of entrails, it's all just textures. She looks at it in the same way. So I need to, the camera is about being connected with her. So I need to point it at this, like she would undergo horrific abuse and violence. And I need to honor that. I don't want to sanitize it. It's like, this is a scene in the movie that like, I actually, even on set, we just did one take and I had to cut it because I couldn't handle it. And at editing, like I only ever saw it once. So I was like, it's the one take, I know where it goes. Approximately you go from here to here. And I just didn't watch it. Every time we had to watch it, or the whole film, I would often step out and come back in. There's very few times I actually sat through it, even in sound mix. But I feel like you have to honor this person's truth. The film is making me do that. And, of course, the film is coming from me. I'm not talking about like an ethereal thing, but it's still about tapping into this frequency. And I think a creative story that. For it to be good, as far as I can see, it needs to come from somewhere unconscious, and then you have to honor that. You can't just impose things. I don't come up with an intellectual concept or statement and then try to shape something around that, because I think that comes out feeling very empty and mechanical. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. I don't know if
no, this is fantastic. It's amazing to hear your perspective on it. The last thing I want to know is, I don't know if you can sum this up, in an easy way, but what would you say are your influences? What have been the things that have kind of impacted you that led to this film, or maybe had a part to play in what the film looks like?
I think other people are a better judge of this. I think I need more distance, because like I said, it's all coming from an unconscious part of me. I'm not thinking about someone like, I was reading a lot of Virginia Woolf when I wrote it, and I do remember thinking consciously, not even in relation to this film, but like that I would love to capture a stream of feelings or a stream of consciousness with in a movie way, the way she does with words. But beyond that, again, it wasn't like I sat down and how do I do this? Like something, a feeling came to me, and then a voice and a character, and then I shaped it into the story. And it all came from somewhere unconscious, from inside of me. That unconsciousness was shaped by watching 8,000 movies and reading all these novels and connecting with them intensely. Like, you know, a lot of the most important people in my life are people I've never met because they were dead before I was born. You know, the Virginia Woolfs and the William Faulkners and the, you know, Eisenstein, Katharine Hepburn. I know you probably can't see her in this movie, but I can. But only afterwards, you know. I think influences for me, and I think for a lot of us, are unconscious. And it's also like the correct answer to this question is probably more valid when it's a different person's perspective compared to mine. But then the influences that are cited in reviews often are appropriate, but I'm just like, really? That's who you see? And I do see that person. There's an obvious one. But I'm like, because obviously, so okay, let's talk openly. Terrence Malick keeps coming up, and I'm like, he's Jesus to me. I adore him, and I can see that. But I'm like, I see Andrea Arnold in this movie 10 times more than Terrence Malick. I watched it yesterday for the first time in 8 months, and I was like, okay, let me find, because I was surprised by that a little bit. I was like, okay, I have distance, and I'm just like, absolutely, I see Terrence Malick, but also see all of European cinema since 1960. And I'm just going, did people just delete like Herzog and Renee and Jane Campion, for fuck's sake?
I totally thought of Herzog. I have to admit, I had a distinct feeling in a few places.
Yeah, I mean, and like I can see that a lot more, frankly, you know. So, but these are like, again, unconscious things. But I remember being, you know, hit by Aguirre. I watched it when I was like 13, in a way that like, I remember that feeling, or Andrei Rublev as well. I remember that feeling of literally, I felt like I was in the 1500s. And when I sat down to, you know, write this movie, I had this feeling of like, oh my God, I'm in the 1900s and it feels so real. And I wasn't thinking, well, like Herzog or like Malick. I mean, Malick gives me that feeling too. I was like, oh, how did they do it? It's literally like, wait, follow this feeling where it takes me. And then it's only afterwards that intellectually I go, oh, well, yeah, of course, it was shaped because I was chasing that feeling of being transported to another time and place in the way that these people made me feel, you know? And how you do that is inevitably shaped by how others did it before you, because that's where you found it, you know, that feeling. So yeah, anyway, that's my relationship. But ultimately, I really genuinely feel like I could be so wrong on this point, because I don't have the distance, really, I don't.
Well, thank you so much for the time. It's really a pleasure to chat. I feel like I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I'm at a time of 3:02.
I feel like I could talk to you. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see more of your work, and you know, congratulations on this.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks very much.